This is joint work with Mireille Jacobson and Arthur Stone. We're all at USC. Oh, and now I can't. Okay. So the COVID-19 pandemic has changed radically how people live their day-to-day life with potential implications for health and well-being. In fact, recent work has highlighted the pandemic's toll on mental health. It's been shown by many papers that there's been increasing in depressive symptoms and psychological distress. But much less is understood about kind of the effect on other measures of well-being, measures that are not, necessarily mental health measures. So in this paper, we take a broader well-being definition, and we look at depressive symptoms, but also other measures such as negative affect, positive affect, life satisfaction, self-rated health, and pain. We focus on seniors, and we look at changes just before and after community spread of COVID-19 was recognized in the US. We're going to look at which demographic groups were most affected, and also how the changes in well-being were related to COVID-related variables, such as local death rates, whether you lost your job or income due to COVID, and perceptions of getting COVID and dying from the disease. So subjective perceptions. So we use a large nationally opt-in online panel called Dynata, and we collected 3 waves of data. The first one was, in November 2019 to February 2020, and we interviewed over 26,000 respondents ages 60 to 69 at a time. And that was for another project. That's why we have this age range. And then in March, the pandemic hit, and we decided to re-interview as many of these respondents as possible. So we re-interviewed almost 80% of these respondents in April and May of 2020. And we went back to the respondents on wave 3 in July and August. I'm gonna show today some results from wave 1 and wave 2. So it's important to note that those who did not respond, wave 2 and wave 3, had lower income, education, and worse mental health at wave 1. So if you think those are the people who would be most affected by the pandemic, then you should think about the changes I'm going to show you here as lower bounds. We also matched our data to COVID death rates at the county of residence level. So my first question is, are there changes in well-being over time and over space? And the short answer is yes. So in the in the left panel, I show you kind of changes in depressive symptoms, both in wave 1 and wave 2 among the people who answered both waves, and also by county of residence, the ones that are like below the 90th percentile of death rates, of local death rates, and those 90th and above. The 90th, like the hardest hit counties, right? And you can see that we saw, consistent with the literature, we see pretty large increases in both groups, especially among those living in hardest hit areas. This is true for depressive symptoms, but also for measures for negative affect, which ask respondents, in the last, did you feel a lot of the following feelings a lot during the day yesterday? And here we have anger, sadness, stress, and worry. So you see that people are much more feeling these negative emotions much more. Consistently, we see a reduction in positive affect. This is happiness and enjoyment. And, but the reduction is smaller. And most interesting, if we look at Cantrell ladder, which is a more evaluative measure of well-being, we see decreases, but they're, again, much, much smaller than the increases in depression and affect. So the Cantrell ladder, for those who are not familiar, asks respondents to say where in a ladder from 0 to 10 they think they stand in their life right now. So it's a measure that, makes them evaluate their life, stop and think about your life and think about, where it is right now. So very different than the affect measures. When we look at self-rated health, this is just, 1 to 5, poor to excellent. We see absolutely no change. And remarkably, when we ask about pain, again, measure similar to the affect measures, did you experience pain a lot of the day yesterday? We see large decreases for both groups. So this is a remarkably change from, the affect measures where we see people are getting, worse well-being. So now we kind of do the same, but then we look, are there differences by gender and education? And first, I'm showing you here some regressions, and I show that the changes that I showed you in the bar graphs are highly significant. And when we break them by gender and education, we see that most of the effects are coming for female respondents. Female respondents are getting a lot of increases in depression symptoms and in negative affect. We see some differences by education, but they're not significant. We see a similar pattern for positive affect and Cantor ladder. Again, these are smaller changes, but they're still significant, more likely to affect female respondents. Poor self-rated health doesn't change, as I showed you in the bar graph, and there's really no heterogeneity on that. And pain, we see this large decrease is about a 5 percentage point decrease out of a wave 1 average of 40% reporting pain. But again, we see no differences by gender and education. So in my last few minutes, I want to go to my third question. Okay, so we see these big changes, but are they related to, COVID variable? How much these COVID variables mediate changes in well-being? And by COVID variables, I have like this, we have measured a few, and I show you 5 here. One, again, whether you live in a county that was hard hit, that's the 90th percentile or above on the COVID death rate. Whether
Sylvia,
you lost, yeah.
we're just out of time, but if you want to present into your question Q&A, that's perfectly fine too.
Yeah, I'll just do that. Whether you lost your job and income due to COVID, whether what your self-reported chance of getting COVID and dying of COVID if you get the disease, and whether COVID kept you from exercising. And first, for negative effect, we can see that not only all these measures are highly significant, but also they, if you think about a mediation analysis, they kind of knock down the wave 2 indicator, which is the change in negative effect. And also we see something similar for depressive symptoms. Again, something similar for positive effect. We don't see it going down as much. We don't see it fully explaining. But still it explains somewhat. And interestingly, we actually don't see, again, pain being kind of the outlier here, we don't see these variables explaining our pain differences. So just to conclude, since I'm already out of time, I think kind of the assumptions of purely, as Ari was talking about the kind of like the previous paper also, these assumptions of purely negative well-being changes might be unfounded, especially when we think about the seniors, right, the elderly. We know in this data, we see consistent, we see like large increases in depressive symptoms, negative effect, decreases in positive effect, which which actually kind of come back, as again, Ari showed his UAS graph. We also see in wave 3 that we don't go back to pre-COVID levels, but we definitely reverse a lot, it bounced back a lot from April and May, this negative well-being changes. But also we see that even in April and May, life satisfaction and self-rated health don't really change, and pain actually decreases. And this pain decrease is somewhat puzzling, but again, we see that in wave 3, it's reversed, except for counties that were hard hit in July and August, which is when we collected wave 3, which again suggests the role for limitations in movements in reducing the pain levels in these populations, which, as people, if this pandemic goes on and on, might actually have worse effects in the long run, as sedentary lifestyles might in fact increase pain in the longer run.